This is a study that was done on a cell phone that was held next to the ear. This is a view from on top of the head. A 5-year-old child, as you see, the radiation penetrates most of their skull. A 10-year-old child, a little bit less, and an adult, a little bit less. So this shows just how vulnerable children are to RF radiation absorption.
Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here, your host of UnWoke.Academy. We've got a special treat for you today. I've got multiple guests and we've got a slide deck we're going to jump into. Today's conversation, boy, how do I set this up? I'm going to tease this out by saying that about 6 months ago, I was invited to speak in a beautiful little town in Southwest Ohio near Cincinnati and met some people from an organization called SWORT. And what does SWORT stand for? It stands for Southwest Ohio Citizens for Responsible Technology. And from that, I've met a great number of people who are very involved in exploring and researching the health implications of some of this new technology that's coming out. And I thought about how to put that in context. Well, the first thing to know is that UnWoke's role is going to be figuring out the finances behind it. We're the follow the money people. We want to know who is behind the scenes orchestrating the rollout of all these 5G towers. And we rely on folks like our guests today to inform us about the health implications. And so when thinking about that, I wanted to share with you my personal context. And I brought to the conversation today a snack box of crackers. What does the snack box of crackers have anything to do with responsible technology, cell phones, and those sorts of things? Well, I thought about it. And if you've watched my podcast before, I've drawn some sort of allegory between healthy food, healthy things that we eat, and behaviors, and healthy financial habits, healthy financial patterns. Well, these happen to be some crackers that my family loves, but I discovered a while ago that a very close family member of mine is allergic to flaxseed. And that gave me a starting point, and I hope you'll follow me in this logic. If there's a chance that there's a food allergy to anything, and there are a lot of food allergies out there, the public kind of snaps to attention, especially where children are involved. And we're very conscious of not exposing children to harmful toxins and things that they might have allergic response to. We need to be better about applying the same sort of protections for children and society where our use of technology is involved. I was surprised to discover that allergies to flaxseed exist. But then again, years ago, I'd never heard of an allergy to peanuts, but that can be life-threatening. So when it comes to the technology that we bring into our homes or allow utility companies to attach to the sides of our homes or carry around in our pockets, for heaven's sakes, I don't claim to be an expert, but I do know some. So that's why I've brought on some great guests today to talk about what they're finding in the realm of the technologies that are being rolled out, all this 5G stuff. Odette Wilkens and Sean Polacik, make sure that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I saw the nod of that's close. Welcome.
I get that all the time.
What's that?
I said I get that all the time. I'm used to it.
I'm sorry about that. You can correct me, please, on either the intro, the bio, or anything else. I stumble into this sort of just with a little bit of knowledge and looking for your expertise. So Odette, starting with you, can you give us a little bit of background on you and where you're coming from in this issue?
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to be here. I'm Odette Wilkens, and I'm a technology transactional attorney. I've been a technology transactional attorney for over 20 years. And I'm also president and general counsel of Wired Broadband, Inc., which is a nonprofit in New York City. I'm also executive director and general counsel of the New York City Alliance for Safe Technology, because we have a lot of people in New York City who do not want 5G towers on the sidewalks of New York. And they're planning on putting 2,000 of them on the sidewalks of New York, right outside people's windows. People don't want them there. And I'm also chair and general counsel of the National Call for Safe Technology, because not only is it in New York City that they don't want them in Ohio, and they don't want them in the rest of the United States. So we represent over 100 community organizations and individuals all around the country who are opposing the irresponsible deployment of this technology. Now, there's a responsible and a safe way of doing it, and there's an irresponsible and unsafe way of doing it, and we're doing it the latter. And what's interesting is that when you were talking about flax seeds and peanuts and allergies to them, That's something that you can see. That's something tangible. You can see it, you can feel it, you can taste it, you have the reaction to it, and you know that there's a cause and effect. Unfortunately, with wireless radiation, you cannot see it, you can't smell it, you can't feel it until you are actually injured by it. And it's kind of like it's really an invisible hazard. It's similar to, I would say, gas on a stove. Except that with gas on a stove, they put in a stinky smell. So you know that there's an impending danger and you know what to do in order to stop that danger. With wireless radiation, there is no smell to it. There's nothing added to it to give the public warning. And unfortunately, with wireless radiation, it is biologically active, which means that you don't have to be aware of the injury for your cells to become injured. And then it injures you on the chromosomal level. And by the time that happens, it's a bit late. And then you are injured. It is cumulative. And then it's either a temporary injury or a permanent injury. So that's what we have. That's the difference between food allergies and an allergy to wireless radiation, or the symptoms from wireless radiation.
Thank you for that description. And that's it really changes perspective and how we think about the technologies that we utilize. Sean, we're going to cut over to you. Please correct me on the proper pronunciation of your last name.
It would be Polacik, but I take the Americanized version of that too.
Understood.
But, anyway, my background is I'm an automation controls technician. I've been working in the pharmaceutical and oil industries for about 15 years before I myself became injured by all the wireless and electromagnetic fields in industry, which that was roughly around 2019 when I stopped working. But in light of all that, having that technical understanding as to how electricity kind of works, because of my experience in industry, that led me down the path to looking into this. How is this affecting me on a cellular level? And I left work and I had no idea what was happening to me. And it took many, many years before I finally met a doctor that was, schooled in this kind of stuff, and said, well, maybe you have a problem with electromagnetic sensitivity. It's like, what? I started looking into this. It's like, whoa, this is something else. So, I took the engineering approach, based on my background. I cleaned up my home, got all my wiring done and got rid of all the wireless radiation. I actually started to improve. So I'm a lot better. My blood markers are looking a lot better than they were when I first started. I'm actually off my thyroid medication because I had, autoimmune thyroid disease as a result of this. So, it's something that really needs to be taken very seriously as far as a public health concern. So that's my kind of short snippet of where I'm coming from on this.
Bear with me. I think at various points during today's conversation, I'm going to put things in what I believe to be layperson's perspective. Having a little bit of exposure to this topic and the content that we're discussing today, I have a little perspective, and I think perhaps most importantly, I have the intention to learn. And as I started looking into this, I learned something about cell phone towers and the sort of how they manifest. And one of the interesting characteristics of cell phone towers dating back at least, I want to say 20 years, it was reported where they were putting up cell phone towers, they noticed reduced or eliminated wildlife activity. And bugs in particular were not climbing and don't climb on cell phone towers, or extremely limited. In my, again, layperson's perspective, I think that many animals have better intuition and awareness than humans often do. We can tend to be sort of oblivious. And one prime example I think is really cool and interesting is tidal waves. When tidal waves arrive, people on the beach sort of stand around mystified, but animals hours before will escape up into higher ground because they sense something about the atmosphere around them. We're oblivious to that often, but if that's true, and I wonder if that's something you've heard of before or know anything about, if it's true that animals and wildlife and bugs avoid the things that we're building into these towers, then it, to me, is an immediate implication that we are doing things that we're unaware of. Have you heard of that before?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There have been studies done, especially by a gentleman by the name of Manville, who was in the I believe in the Forest Service in the U.S. Forest Service. I'm not getting the name correct, but he had a pretty high position there, and he found that there were definitely changes in migratory patterns, in orientation, in fertility, behavior changes, and many things. And they found that there were biological effects to the animals. Unfortunately, the FCC emission limits do not take into consideration animals. They only take into consideration people. And even that is inadequate, wholly inadequate. But it has been found that there are fewer birds to the point where there are no birds in the area, or it's been reported that an entire flock of birds has dropped dead on the ground. And it has been reported that that was due to nearby cell towers. When they are far away from cell towers, you'll see more migratory birds, you'll see more wildlife. When they are close to towers, you will see very little, if none. So that should be an indication, like of the canary in the mines, that literally, that this is something that we should be avoiding. And indeed, I have a slide deck that I'd like to show you where there have been cancer clusters of people in areas that where cell towers have been installed. Unfortunately, there needs to be more testing for wildlife and animals, and there hasn't been. And there is no agency right now that is doing any testing on any of the effects of wireless radiation on animals, on wildlife, on plants, on bees, which are severely affected by EMFs, electromagnetic radiation frequency. And there's no testing done. Not the EPA, not the FDA, not the CDC, not the NIH. The National Toxicology Program announced that they were not going to do any studies on wireless radiation just recently. The EPA was defunded after it found in the 1990s that there were biological effects associated with wireless radiation. How about that? An agency finds that there's a public safety hazard and they get defunded from doing any further research. And that was around 1995 or so when wireless radiation was found to be biologically active. And the EPA then was defunded, and the wireless industry went into action in Congress and succeeded in the 1996 Telecommunications Act to make sure that they would have no liability for personal injury due to wireless radiation, so long as it's within the FCC limits. Now, the rub there is that the FCC was ruled against by an appellate federal court, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, that stated that the FCC, when it was reviewing its 1996 limits back in 2019, ignored 11,000 pages of scientific studies showing harm within their limits, that they did not take into consideration exposure to children. They did not take considerations of exposure to the environment or long-term exposure to people in general. And the court mandated that they do so, and that they go back to the drawing board because the FCC said, oh, there's nothing to see here, despite the fact that there were 11,000 pages of studies showing harm that was placed in their docket. So it is now, that was in 2021 when the court ruled against the FCC. It is now 2024 and the FCC has not updated its limits. So meanwhile, the telecommunications industry is enjoying complete immunity and is being shielded from liability for personal injury due to wireless radiation, so long as they operate within the FCC's limits. The FCC's limits are way out of proportion to what is safe for the environment. And so now we're between a rock and a hard place. And that is the rub.
I've had occasion to be in, around, and near better than half of Ohio's 613 school districts. And one of the things that I take particular note of is this building of cell phone towers, cell apparatus on stadiums around K through 12 education, in particular the football stadiums at the high school level. So there are some people who are balking at that and think that it is wildly, egregiously irresponsible to be attaching this cell technology, this new RF type of technology, and you can correct me if I'm using the wrong terminology, to children's K through 12 environment. I mean, it's the argument that I've heard is financial, which kind of ties back to the work that we do at UnWoke, which is tracking back and figuring out the financial mechanisms that fund this stuff and who makes money off of it. But the answer that I've heard to that is that renting the outside perimeter of some of these stadiums is not only elevated, but it's really inexpensive, and then is supposedly financially beneficial to the school district, because there's big money, I guess, they can come in, bring into the school district by renting out these, the ability to attach 5G and things like it. Do you know anything about this new circumstance?
Well, I'll tell you, in terms of financial considerations, the big financial consideration that no one is looking at and should be investigated by every single attorney general in the United States is the fact that back in the 1990s, we were charged surcharges on our landlines for the purpose of building out a fiber network to connect all homes. And that certainly is what happened in New York State. We were all charged back in the 1990s so that the telecom industry would be able to connect every single home in New York State to fiber. That has not happened. So what happened to all the money? We have reason to believe, and it's been reported, that it's been siphoned off for their wireless enterprises. That they showed that their wired enterprises were unprofitable, and therefore they should go with wireless. And so that is basically a betrayal of public trust. That and a waste of the taxpayers' monies, because it was relied upon that they would connect every single home with fiber, and they didn't. So where did the money go? That is something that was a subject of a lawsuit, and the judge gave permission to look behind what has happened, and for the attorneys generals to investigate. That's where the real money is. So that is something that they have not done. Now, with respect to putting these towers at a stadium, that's very dangerous. In California, Chula Vista, first of all, these towers are electrical installations. This particular tower that was right next to the bleachers of a stadium caught on fire. By the time the fire department was able to get there, it had burned down into molten plasma. The temperatures can go up as high as 35,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 3 times the estimated temperature of the sun. Luckily, there were no people on the bleachers, but this melted all over the bleachers. So you could have just imagined the catastrophe that it would have happened if there was a game. So these do not belong anywhere near people. There needs to be a safe fall zone in the event of fire or collapse of a tower, and there wasn't any. It was right next to the bleachers. So this is something that needs to be looked at as well. And you should have none of these towers right next to people. They're very dangerous.
I absolutely agree. Based on everything that I've been seeing and reading about and learning.
The fall zones are definitely a big problem. I mean, just here in Cincinnati, for instance, I can look around and see cell towers right in the middle of neighborhoods and next to buildings, with barely 6 feet in between. I mean, any fire, any fall, I mean, you're going to have these things going through people's roofs, on the sidewalks, into traffic. I mean, it's egregious placement of these things without any consideration of public safety. And that's not even including the close proximity of microwave radiation exposure. I mean, that's a whole other different ballgame in itself. But at least from as far as where I tend to focus my own experiences as far as technology stuff, I look a lot at, like, say, the electrical, magnetic, EMI stuff, also from these installations. Since these installations, they use AC to DC inverter technology to power a lot of the equipment. So what happens is when you pull in power from the grid, it changes that over to DC. It creates a set of harmonics. Now, there was I forget the name of the school district. I think it was also in California, that they had erected one of these towers, and there was a lot of students and teachers getting leukemia and cancer. So I think it was Stetzer that had went in and conducted the study. And what they found was that the cell equipment was putting so much EMI onto the wiring that it was coming back into the school, and that electromagnetic field was interacting with people and giving them cancer. You can imagine, if you've got a cell tower, 6 feet outside your bedroom window, and the inverter's dumping all this onto your power lines, you're getting that dosage along with the microwave radiation. There's just all sorts of safety considerations they're not even looking at.
Do you get the sense, or would you guess, that the reason that these landowners, these property owners, are willing to put this new type of equipment onto their facilities is that they can make money? Are they paid to?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so they get like a monthly check?
Yeah. In fact, I think there was a post on Nextdoor where I had posted about a lot of the stuff in Coleraine. A gentleman had made a comment like he would love to have one because his buddy is making $6,000 every month for having the cell tower on it. I was like, well, yeah, you'll be singing a different tune when you get cancer from that same installation.
Well,
yeah,
good for you for pointing that out and fighting back, because the more that information gets out there and we call people out for this type of behavior, it's very short-sighted to on the side of a high school football stadium or on an apartment complex. It's just short-sighted to look only at the money and not look at the health implications of it.
And by the way, EMI stands for electromagnetic interference, which is another word, a technical word for dirty electricity. That's what I learned. That's what Sean taught me.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification.
Yes, thank you for that. I would be the type to get close but have it slightly off or use slightly the wrong terminology, because that's where I am in my early stage of becoming informed about these sorts of things.
Absolutely, that's really fine. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the federal telecom bills and also about the health hazards that people should expect from these cell towers. You already have my curriculum vitae. We already talked about my background. All right, so what I want to do is I want to give you, first of all, a microcosm of what it looks like in New York City to have a variety, a rather smorgasbord of different types of wireless radiation devices. And so these are what they're called small cells, and they look like little backpacks on utility poles. And in New York City, we're about to get 11,000 of them on our streets. And then we have the pole top antennas, and this is the view outside of a third floor apartment outside of a child's bedroom. That's how close this is. And then you have the rooftop antenna farms, and this is on the corner of Midtown Manhattan. And as you can see, I can't even count the number of antennas that are on top of this roof. So now this is the model of the 5G tower, and it is 3 stories high. And as you can see, it either comes with advertising on the right or no advertising on the left. And in the middle picture from New Yorkers for Wired Tech, this is a photograph showing the scale of how tiny the people are compared to how huge this monolithic pole is on a city street. And as you can see, it's barely just a few feet from a building.
And less than that from the people standing around looking to buy from that food vendor.
Right. All right. So right now, there's been tremendous amount of opposition by New York City residents. And this flyer is a little bit dated because as opposed to 16, we now have 17 community boards that have voted for a moratorium against the 5G towers on various issues because of health, public safety, nuisance, privacy, reduced property values. Nobody wants to buy a piece of property that's close to where these towers are going to be. And they're ugly and obtrusive in design. These towers, as in New York City, we love to have graffiti, right? So these 5G towers are a graffiti magnet. And as you can see, somebody took the sticker of this Link 5G tower and just put it on the side of the tower. You wouldn't have graffiti unless somebody actually painted on it. So this is painted actually on both sides. This is just a photograph on one side, and this is on Queens Boulevard in Queens. Now, the idea of having these 5G towers and just having cell towers in general is about bridging the digital divide. Well, I've got news for you. The wireless will never bridge the digital divide. Because first of all, who can afford a new 5G phone, 6G, 7G phone, and whatever number it's going to go up to? And these are just marketing terms. It's like having a new iPhone 12, iPhone 15, iPhone 20. And you constantly have to buy new products. Now, if this is supposed to serve the unserved and underserved in the population, how are they going to be able to be ahead of the 8 ball if they're constantly having to buy new devices? And being a technology attorney, the rule of thumb, the economic model for technology companies is to make their products artificially obsolete so that they can guarantee future revenues. And that means more expensive services, more devices to buy. So the U.S. Government Accountability Office stated that 5G is liable to exacerbate the digital divide. And the National Digital Inclusion Alliance said, who's going to be able to afford a 5G phone? And so that's what we have. That's really what we're talking about here. Next.
Actually, can I interject a question? This is
Sure.
a curiosity question. You may not know the answer to this. So I don't know how many people actually care. I actually, out of concern and waiting for some of the technology that allows me more privacy, I'm sitting on what is probably a relic smartphone that is not 5G. But I notice when I open up my smartphone, it actually says 5G. So it's hitting off of a tower that is informing the phone to notify me that 5G is apparently available, but it's not possible because mine is old enough. It predates the existence of 5G. Why is it, do you think it's marketing? That's my theory, that they're trying to convince me to switch to 5G.
I would say because the simple answer is in firmware, but 5G in and of itself just stands for 5th generation, but it doesn't necessarily operate at 5 gigahertz like some people would subscribe to. So it might be using similar frequencies that your 4G phone still uses, and they're using that instead to push the data packets to say, hey, it's got 5G available, you can update to this.
Thanks for humoring me on that question.
All right, so the NTIA, which is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, has affirmed fiber to the premises. And the former FCC chair, the Federal Communications Commission chair, Tom Wheeler, gave testimony to Congress, and he said that fiber is future-proof and wireless should only be used as a last resort, because once you put fiber in, it's once and done. And the lifespan is much, much longer, 25 to 50 years at least, if not longer, whereas the lifespan for wireless is usually 5 years, again, because of the planned obsolescence to guarantee future revenues. And for fiber, it's great for in-home use, and it's unmatched in its speed, reliability, capacity, data security. There is very little security with 5G. And Tom Wheeler has now coined the term the 5G cyber paradox, because the more efficient 5G is, the more efficient the architecture is, the less secure it is, because 5G is actually a software-based system. It is not hardware-based like 3G and 4G. If there's a security breach, 3G and 4G can quarantine the breach. 5G is a software-based system. Once you gain access to one node, you gain access to the entire system. And because 5G is supposed to have thousands and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of nodes all over, that increases the surface area for hackability. So what is happening to our landlines? The telecom industry is saying, oh, bridge the digital divide. But meanwhile, they're taking away our landlines. That is our emergency hotline, if you will. Because with a landline, if the electricity goes down, you still have your landline. If the cellular equipment goes down, you still have your landline. What happened in February of this year, there was a cellular shutdown, or actually a cellular failure, because there was an update that was done. And what happened is that it disconnected, starting 70,000 people, and from what I've heard, millions of people went without service, and they were unable to dial 911 or for emergency services. And some of the advisories by the telecom industry was to use your landline. Well, they're taking away the landlines. So while they're having us focus our attention on bridging the digital divide, they're taking away the most resilient part of our communication system. All right, so as I said before, there's no regulation for safety. No one is minding the store, not the EPA, FDA, FCC, CDC, NIH, and since the 1990s, pretty much. And again, the EPA was defunded when it found that there were biological effects from wireless radiation. There have been a number of sickness clusters around cell towers. One of them has been in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. 17 residents got sick when there was a cell tower placed down the block in their neighborhood. The children were vomiting in their beds. Pets were getting sick. The Board of Health issued a cease and desist order to turn off the tower. The cell tower provider then sued the town, and the cease and desist order had to be rescinded. So many residents have evacuated their homes, their dream homes, and others had to stay because they could not afford to evacuate or to move someplace else. One has already died of cancer. Now, we were talking about cell towers around schools. This cell tower was placed in front of an elementary school in Ripon, California. After that got put in, 4 children ages 6 to 11 got cancer, brain, liver, kidney, and the child with the brain cancer and it's called a glioblastoma, which is a very aggressive form of brain cancer, died in August of 2024 of this year. 4 teachers got breast cancer. After that occurred, the tower was removed by the provider, and there were no more reported instances of cancer. The third cluster that I'd like to talk to you about is the one that happened in Idaho, in Idaho. And that's after 5G cell towers were installed. A cluster of residents developed atrial fibrillation, AFib, or heart palpitations, or the like. And one resident who we are in touch with had a AFib surgery and is now a plaintiff in a lawsuit against a telecom carrier, and that carrier still refuses to provide accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So what do we have to expect here? We need to work locally to inform our legislators that we do not want the towers. However, that will be of limited value if we do not also act on the federal level. There are now over 70 federal bills to eliminate local control. And the counter to that is a bill that we need to get support for, HR 8082, which is called Securing Local Communities' Input in Broadband Development Act. We want to support it. It is repealing the very FCC rules and time limits that are giving the telecom industry the ability to go around and tell the local governments that their hands are tied. Now, of course, their hands are not tied, but because of this rule, it gives them ammunition, and they have succeeded in introducing cell towers in towns where they don't want them. So we urge that this be supported in the House. And so if you have any if your representatives, if you know your representatives, or if you don't, look them up and get them to support HR 8082. It has been introduced by Representative Smith from New Jersey. And we also want to support it with a Senate companion bill. So inform your senators and inform your representatives to pass this bill in order to protect whatever you have that is protecting you now on the local level. All right, so right now, the bill that is getting traction and we need to oppose is HR 4141. And that is the Broadband for Americans, the Responsible Streaming Act. Now that eliminates environmental and historic preservation reviews for a large swath of wireless facilities. And it runs contrary to existing federal law that requires that to be done. And it runs contrary to a landmark federal case, United Tutoa versus the FCC in 2019, in which the court ruled against the FCC when they wanted to give a categorical exemption from environmental and historic preservation review for 5G towers. And the court said, no, you are required to undergo environmental and historic preservation reviews for 5G deployment. This bill would take that away, would take that success away. HR 3557 is the American Broadband Deployment Act. 3557 along with 4141 are the two big kahunas for the wireless industry to completely eliminate local control. It preempts any local zoning. It gives the FCC the authority to invalidate your local regulations that you've decided on how to deploy these cell towers. And it mandates owners permitting shot clocks and deemed approved deadlines. So if you do not approve it by their shot clock, if they give you 60 days or 90 days and you don't approve it by that time, you then it will be deemed approved. And it also expressly prohibits moratoria. So if your town needs additional time in order to sort out the health impacts and other things, 90 days is not very long. This bill expressly prohibits any moratoria in order to give your town additional time. So these two have to be opposed. 4141, however, is getting traction, and we need to oppose it before it gets passed in the House. Again, we have a continuation of the Parade of Horribles, which is H.R. 8790. It's Fix Our Forests Act. And this is supposed to do a pilot to test 5G to prevent wildfires. Well, the problem with that is that cell towers have caused wildfires. And so the wildfires, first of all, wireless installations, I've said before, are electrical installations. And they have to comply with electrical and building codes. Now, if a cell tower catches on fire, it usually takes up to 60 minutes to cut the power before the firefighters can put any water on it. Otherwise, they get electrocuted. So imagine if there's no fall zone, if there's only a few feet of fall zone between the tower and a person's house, and it catches on fire, and you have to wait up to the firefighters have to wait up to 60 minutes for the power to be cut. That can do a tremendous amount of damage. Now, there were faulty telecommunications equipment, or the telecommunications equipment contributed to these fires. And California has had major fires that are attributable in part or whole to these cell towers. So, for instance, in Woolsey, California, 2018, that was the worst fire in California history. It caused $6 billion of damage, 100,000 acres destroyed, 295,000 people were evacuated, and there were 3 deaths. So that is how bad it can get. All right, so now you have in the Senate, 1764 Western Wildfire Support Act. And this directs the federal land management agencies to expedite 5G deployment for wildfire detection. So as we just saw, you're actually putting a match in the fire in our natural resources and our forests if you start putting cell towers there. Because also one thing that they don't talk about is that 5G runs hot. The industry knows that 5G runs hot because there's a lot of analog to digital conversions that happen, and it happens very fast, and it heats up the equipment. So that can also add to the fire risk.
Good heavens. Talk about contraindicated. Totally
contraindicated. All right, so the question that I'm always asked at community boards in New York and everywhere around the country is 5G safe? Well, it produces biological effects, adverse health and environmental impacts. So there was a TV broadcast that was done by Larry King Live back in the 1990s. I'm dating myself here. And he interviewed a man whose wife died of brain cancer. And an MRI showed the tumor site was where she held her cell phone. The next day, the telecom stocks went down. That's in 1991. So then the wireless industry put out $28.5 million, and they funded industry research under the Wireless Technology Research Project. And it was overseen by the FDA, the EPA, the board of Harvard's School of Public Health, et cetera. And they found biological effects and potential hazards to human health. That was in 1995. That's when the EPA was defunded. Then in 2000, there was a major telecom carrier which commissioned a study that found links to cancer, leukemia, neurological disorders, and cognitive impairment, with a special attention to children and those who are already impaired from electromagnetic radiation.
Just pausing there briefly, do you know much about allegations of sleeplessness, agitation, and anxiety around exposure among children?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's been shown that it causes ADHD and it causes neurological damage, and particularly because their brains are so thin, the radiation penetrates their skull more fully. And actually, I have a picture of that. So I have that in a few slides. I'll show that. And so the industry itself has acknowledged the health risks of electromagnetic radiation. And for instance, Swisscom, which is a big Swiss telecommunications company, filed a patent to reduce electromagnetic radiation because of the high risk of cancer. That was in 2004. Then the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified wireless radiation as a possible human carcinogen in 2011. That was 2G and 3G. Then in 2018, the National Toxicology Program found clear evidence of cancer And the Ramazzini Institute confirmed it in the same year. The FDA ignored it. In 2019, the FCC's docket showed that there were 11,000 pages of scientific peer-reviewed studies showing biological effects within their limits, but the FCC ignored it. And in 2019, also the U.S. Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut questioned the telecom industry to see if there was any pre-market testing of 5G, and they said there was none that they know of by industry. And so he said, oh, so we're flying blind here as far as health and safety is concerned. So there's no pre-market testing of 5G. And by the way, none for 4G either, as far as I understand. Then in 2020, a New Hampshire commission was formed in order to study the effects of 5G and wireless radiation, and they found harm to people and to the environment. And then in 2023, since January of 2023, there have been 8 case studies of 5G towers and rooftop antennas, and they all showed harm. Headaches, tinnitus, abnormal fatigue, sleep disturbance, burning skin, and trouble concentrating. And by the way, Jonathan, it's known that it's been reported that wireless radiation does deplete melatonin. So if you have trouble sleeping, that's why. So turn off your Wi-Fi at night at the very least. And at the most, take out all Wi-Fi at home. You don't need it. You just need a wired connection, wired Ethernet connection. That should be sufficient. In terms of wireless radiation, even the industry calls it a pollutant. They're characterized as a pollutant by the telecom industry in their device protection plans, and they disclaim any injuries. So check out your device protection plan. It'll be in the middle there. And insurance companies such as Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re will not insure for personal injury because of the high risk of personal injury claims, and they call 5G off the leash. So right now what's happening is, as I said before, because the FCC has failed to review the 11,000 pages of scientific studies, the court has deemed that the FCC has acted in an arbitrary and capricious manner, and they remanded or sent back the limits in order for the FCC to review them. And unfortunately, while the FCC has not updated its limits, it is a shield now for industry from liability for personal harm. So it's very important for the FCC to comply with a court order. The court order was in 2021. It is now 2024. They have failed to comply with the court order, and it would be good for your legislators to ask why they have not yet complied. And in Ohio, I believe there were about 7 Ohio lawmakers who sent a letter to the FCC on its FCC's failure to update its emission limits for human exposure. And I have the link right there for you. This is a study that was done on a cell phone that was held next to the ear. This is a view from on top of the head. A 5-year-old child, as you see, the radiation penetrates most of their skull. A 10-year-old child a little bit less, an adult a little bit less. So this shows just how vulnerable children are to RF radiation absorption. This chart shows that people who are living closest to a cell tower will have many, many more symptoms than those living farther away. So as you see the red chart, that's about how many? It's about less than 10 meters from a cell tower, and the ones with the black bar chart is living greater than 300 meters from a cell tower. In any given population, it is estimated that 30% of the population is afflicted with electromagnetic radiation poisoning. And about 1% is so severely disabled that they are no longer able to work or live in areas that have this radiation. And there's a constellation of symptoms, and Jonathan, you pointed to some of them. So it's headaches, nausea, vomiting, tinnitus, hearing loss, heart arrhythmia, tachycardia, neurological disorders, oxidative stress, immune dysfunction, ADHD, and damage to the blood-brain barrier. So just in summary, every wireless installation, there's been no pre-market testing for safe levels of emissions. There's been no monitoring of cumulative exposure. And even the FCC has on its website, states on its website that it does not have sufficient personnel in order to monitor the cumulative exposure. And of course, there's no safety zone for either tower collapse or fire. Okay, so we have some more bills in the parade of horribles, and that includes HR 6492, which is the federal lands bill, and that got passed. That allows for the proliferation of 5G towers all over our parks. And under HR 4510, which was also passed by the House, it expressly excludes 5G towers in a cybersecurity study. even though 5G has been deemed to be the least secure. So when they're doing a study of wireless radiation, they're not going to be studying 5G because 5G would lose. And then we have other bills, such as the Spectrum and National Security Act, and that authorizes a spectrum and increases the FCC budget. Now, what we've done is we've asked people on the Hill to put in questions for the record that the FCC, why has the FCC not complied with the court order, and that this budget should not be increased until it complies with the court order. And in terms of net neutrality, it's fine. We have no problem with net neutrality, except that it allows for the preemption of local zoning. And that's where we would like the FCC to forbear from. I'm going to leave the slide deck with you so that your audience can follow along. Okay, and so this is the Farm Bill, and this allows for the proliferation of wireless radiation all over our farms. Now with 5G, that's going to put our national food supply, at risk, because if that can be easily hacked, then our food supply is in danger. And what is being contemplated here is to do IoT on all the farms and have cell towers proliferate on all the farms. Now that's also going to deplete the farmers' resources, because we found in a court case that a farmer's cows, about 40 of them died of his 200 herd, died after a cell tower was put up. And there was about 20% reduction in milk yield. So that's going to be disastrous for our farmers. We don't want that. So we don't want a proliferation of wireless radiation. That's not going to help the farmers. We have a bunch of resources here. We have resources with wired broadband and the National Call for Safe Technology. And Children's Health Defense has a great resource, stop5g.org, particularly if you need counseling on what to do. And then you've got the Environmental Health Trust, and you can also join the National Call for Safe Technology. We have a meeting twice a month in which we talk about strategies and different things that we can do to help each other. And under our resources tab, you will find that we have already made, I believe, over 25 submissions to federal agencies on this issue. And under advocacy and action, you'll see what we've done with congressional committees. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, I can be reached at wilkens@wiredbroadband.org. Thank you.
Odette, thank you very much for the time that you've given us today and all the work that you're doing to expose all of this. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.